Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to another day of Legal Tea Tuesday. I am so excited. And I am also very, very, very sorry, you guys. We are so late. We were supposed to start about a half an hour ago. It started with my streaming software not recognizing my proper camera. And so I was like, oh, I'll just quickly restart my computer. And then, of course, it goes into all kinds of updates and then the internet not connecting, one thing after another. Such a huge mess. But here we are. We are here. And I'm very excited about today's conversation. I'm very excited to see folks in the chat. We've already got a super chat here from Andy the Game Maker. And I'm going to save this one right here while I bring on our guest today. His name is Aaron Smith-Levin. How are you? I almost just threw you backstage for a second when I was trying to pull you on. Aaron Smith-Levin is from or as you sometimes like to call yourself, AA Ron. I noticed in your channel. You are from the channel Growing Up in Scientology. So why don't you tell folks about yourself, people that are not already viewers of your channel, which it seems like there's a lot of them in the chat today too.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So how to start? I mean, I'm a former Scientologist. I was essentially born and raised in Scientology. And apologies in advance, everyone, for my audio quality not being as good as it might be, but I couldn't get it totally sorted out. So from the age of 12 to the age of 26, I worked full-time for Scientology. So that doesn't literally full-time. I did not go to high school. And so I was 34 when I officially left Scientology. And the latter part of the time I spent working for Scientology was as a member of the C organization, which is essentially the most dedicated core of Scientology staff. Those are the guys who sign, you'll hear about the billion-year contract. That's one of the you hear about. It's the Sea Org members who sign the billion-year contract. Your normal Scientologist or normal Scientology staff member doesn't do that. Okay. So that's just sort of the quick nutshell of, I'm not someone who joined Scientology. There's a whole, the majority of Scientologists in the world at this point, I would say, are people who were actually brought into Scientology as children by their parents, either literally born into it or were just very, very young when their parents got involved. Okay. So I started growing up in Scientology. The idea, the channel, the idea was so much of the stories that were being told, first of all of them were being told through the lens of a non-Scientologist. There was not a platform where former Scientologists were having the kind of discussions they wanted to have with each other. It was always, it just didn't exist. And the idea was that it was needed. And so the only reason I talk about the Danny Masterson case really is because he is a Scientologist. My channel doesn't have a focus on legal issues. Mm-hmm. I talk about Grant Cardone and his legal issues, but only because he's a Scientologist.
Right. Right.
And so let me see. Also for those watching, the story, my story of growing up in Scientology, working for Scientology, and the pretty heartbreaking process of leaving and what it means to leave and what happens is on season 1 on Netflix of the show Scientology and the Aftermath. It's episode 7 of season 1. And yeah, part of my goal on the channel is just to talk about Scientology in a way that is relatable to people who otherwise would go, I can't believe anyone ever falls for this shit. You know, like a lot of the content that's out there about Scientology, people watch it and they think that could never happen to me or anyone I know. And the way I think about it is that if that's your reaction to it, the story has not been told properly, because you don't have to be dumb to be in Scientology. In fact, for some reason, it seems to kind of be, you know, just anecdotally, that there's a lot of highly intelligent people in Scientology. And it's a fair question. How could anyone fall for this shit? But answering that question, how could anyone fall for this, in my opinion, should be part of the goal of telling the story, getting people to understand how people do fall for it. Because if you think it could literally never happen to you, that's not as safe as understanding how it could happen to you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, and that's one of those, it's one of those things that, like, so, you know, I obviously don't cover Scientology usually on my channel. This is just a perfect intersection for my channel and yours right now is this particular case. You know, I usually cover legal cases, and we often talk about how sometimes, you know, when something kind of hits a little bit too close to home, and you know, when for example, when picking a jury, let's say it's a case like this one, it's an SA case, you know, do you want to have women on the jury? Do you not want to have women on the jury? Generally speaking, counterintuitively, probably not, because women will tend to say, I would never put myself in that position. I would never decide what the alleged victim decided here. And it's because of this thought that people will often have, which is just to sort of like think to themselves, like, I would never fall for that. So it's a very common sort of thing. But so it's great that you're doing what you're doing to sort of talk through the psychology of how it works and how, you know, people get sort of convinced in one way or another to go down a certain path.
Yeah. And where that gets really interesting in legal cases like this is it helps to understand how is it that someone could go years without reporting this to the police. Now in various SA cases, you have that happens where people don't realize that's what it was. And that's something that happens just when you have nothing to do with Scientology or religion, when those things have nothing to do with you. And then you add on top of that the fact that Scientologists are literally prohibited from ever reporting something to the authorities. And yet the lawyers can pretend like that's not true, and just, you know, the defense attorneys pretend like that's not true and just be like, well, the reason they didn't report it is because, you know, they didn't have enough time to all get on the same page and get their story straight and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, you literally think that if you were a victim would literally be told that if you report this to the authorities, you're putting your eternal spiritual freedom at stake. And it's going to get tricky because historically, typically, the courts have not allowed themselves to even wade into the field of trying to interpret whether Scientology scripture, what it actually means and what it actually says. The courts are actually not allowed, at least in the cases up until now, to interpret Scientology policy. They were actually prevented from doing so, at least in the cases up until now. I suspect that has largely been because the cases have been of a civil nature. I think in this criminal case, the Judge Almeida is going to allow for interpretation of whether these Scientology policies had a play in everything that happened here, and to what degree. Because I don't think you can tell. I mean, you're the lawyer, not me, but I don't think you can tell a criminal judge, a judge in a criminal case, hey, you're not allowed to make up your mind about what that means. I mean, how can you tell someone you can't make up your mind about what something means, right?
Because we're talking now, it seems like what we're talking about is the distinction between like an organizational policy and a religious belief. Is that what you're saying? Or
Scientology plays this trick where they're one and the same, because L. Ron Hubbard's policies that he wrote for Scientology on how organizations are to be managed, Scientology calls that scripture.
Okay.
not in the real, not in Scientologists in the day-to-day life of being a Scientologist don't call it scripture. Scientologists don't use words like that, but
Okay.
in the courts they do, and
Okay.
the courts aren't allowed to go, hey, you're just using that word because you're being tricky. Like, you're not allowed to tell them that.
Right. Because there's a very strong First Amendment protection. I mean, the state interfering in someone's bona fide religious beliefs, that's a very, very strong protection in the United States. So I can see how that sort of like blending between the two can make things very, very tricky.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
so these are these, you're saying these policies of, and I do want to get into some of like the specific doctrine of Scientology too, but while we're on the topic of like policies and people being prevented from reporting things to authorities, is that because of, so it sounds like it's more because of official written policies as opposed to social pressure, or I mean maybe a bit of both, or which.
Official written policies. This is the Scientology ethics book. I
Okay.
have highlighted the parts of the chapter that talks about high crimes and suppressive acts. These are things for which you can be expelled from Scientology.
Oh, wow.
It specifically says here that you cannot report a Scientologist to the criminal or civil authorities.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's written. Social pressure in Scientology is almost non-existent because even all the social pressure is purely based on what's written.
Right.
There's almost nothing
Right.
in
That makes sense.
Scientology that's just purely culture, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense.
it is, everything is written. And this is
Okay.
going to be one of the things that's going to be horribly embarrassing for Scientology in this trial. I mean, as I was preparing for this, I found online something that was reported on the Underground Bunker where victim B, in the various cases, the victims have different designations.
Mhm.
But victim B, who I do know, actually submitted, per these policies and procedures, submitted a detailed and lengthy written letter to a senior church official called the International Justice Chief, laying out in detail what had been done to her, the
Mhm.
remedies that she had sought internally, how she had been treated, how she'd been mistreated, and specifically asked permission to file a criminal report on Danny and to pursue a civil suit. And in her letter says, I am asking this specifically because I understand that doing so could result in me losing all of my family and friends. And in the response that he sent to her, he did not say, don't worry about it. That's not going to happen. He basically said, you're going to have to do what you think is best after carefully considering the consequences. This is
Okay.
documented in writing. And
Yeah.
this is going to be introduced as evidence in the Masterson case to really show that the pressure that was brought to bear on these witnesses to not come forward, handle everything internally, it's based purely on Scientology policy. And all of it is meticulously documented in writing. It's just going to be so bad for Scientology. Even though
Wow.
Scientology is not a defendant in this case, or what's the proper word for a criminal case? It's not defendant. Is it defendant?
It is defendant. Yeah.
Scientology
Yeah.
is a defendant in this case, but it's sure going to seem like they are.
Yeah. Well, so and to clarify for folks that are kind of new to the Masterson cases, right? Because there's two of them, right? That I'm aware of. So there's a criminal case which was filed in 2020, or well, charges were filed in 2020 against him on three cases of SA under force or fear. So there's three alleged victims in that one. Then there is a civil case, which was filed by four plaintiffs. I think it's three women and one man, alleging essentially retaliation claims for making the allegations about Masterson by coming forward, coming public, because they had filed the civil complaint in 2019. They had made accusations about him in 2017, and then after both of those came the criminal charges. So that one in the civil case, so there's the criminal case. It's just I mean, Masterson is the only criminal defendant. Then in the civil case, Masterson's a defendant along with the Church of Scientology. And I don't know if there's anyone else. I can't remember. I glanced at it briefly, the box, but that one is actually in front of the Supreme Court right now. Last I checked, because there is, it looks like the Church of Scientology has its members sign what's called an arbitration agreement, which basically says if any kind of a dispute arises between the individual members and the church, that they will put their issues in front of an arbitrator, which is essentially like a private judge. I will say as a lawyer that there are costs and benefits to arbitration. Some things can be, good for both parties. Sometimes it's advisable to go to arbitration because it's private. It's pretty quick. You can kind of cut through some red tape. Sometimes litigation can run a very long time. Usually though, that's where the two parties are on equal footing in terms of power. My experience with arbitration agreements has usually been when I was doing employment litigation and I was representing the employees when they were suing their former employers because of wage violations or all kinds of like wage and hour violations in California. There's a lot of them that employers can trip over, or discrimination, retaliation claims, that kind of stuff. But this is a very interesting issue because the claims were said to have arisen, I think, after they had already left the church. And so now there's this issue in front of the Supreme Court about whether or not the arbitration agreement actually applies to that relationship because of the fact that they're no longer in the church. So I know you've been covering that one quite a bit as well. I don't know if you have anything to add to that about like the practice of arbitration agreements in Scientology. It seems like a very useful tool for an organization that really would rather not have people come in and sort of dig around as litigation has a tendency to do.
Yeah. This issue of their arbitration agreements is probably the single most egregious way in which Scientology is currently abusing the legal system. And I sincerely hope that this issue gets shaken out in these current cases, because it's not only a matter of, you said the claims arose after they left Scientology, but and that's true, but it's not just that the claims arose, or maybe this is what that language means. The claims are regarding things that these victims experienced after leaving Scientology. Like it's not like they left Scientology and are bringing claims for things that happened when they were still in.
Right.
They left Scientology and have been harassed after that point. And so, and yet even then, Scientology is still saying that these arbitration agreements should apply. Now, luckily, it's before the Supreme Court, because the Second Appellate Division in California ruled in favor of the plaintiffs that no, these arbitration agreements don't apply in this case. Scientology will always appeal every decision against them as high as possible, even if only as a delay tactic, whether they think it's going to work or not. They have the money to do it. They're always going to do it. Mm-hmm. What is particularly egregious about the arbitration agreement thing is that, and you would have an expert opinion on this, by definition, an arbitration is at least supposed to have the capacity of being fair and balanced, right? I mean, it's almost intrinsic in contract law. It wouldn't be an arbitration if it didn't have the potential of being fair and balanced. And yet Scientology policy dictates that it is a suppressive act to ever do anything that would benefit someone who Scientology has declared a suppressive person. And according to Scientology's own policy, the only people who are allowed to sit as arbitrators are Scientologists in good standing. But the people who are being forced into arbitration are people who Scientology has already declared to be suppressive persons.
Yeah.
And this is where in the civil cases up until now, the lawyers' arguments have been to the court, like, you don't understand. This is a kangaroo court. These are Scientologists who are strictly prohibited from ever finding in favor of a suppressive person. And you're sending the suppressive person to sit in front of them. This is absurd. And the courts have literally said, We are not allowed to interpret the Scientology policy that says that how Scientologists are supposed to treat suppressive persons. We're not allowed to do that. And so you have this really weird contradiction where Scientology wants the courts to enforce or confirm the legality of their contracts without being allowed to interpret whether the contracts actually meet the standards laid out in contract law. I don't personally understand how the courts have ever allowed themselves to be used and abused in this way. It's insane. The only explanation I've heard that makes sense to me is that the courts, particularly if they have conservative justices, will of how they feel about Scientology, would sort of protect the other churches that are, real churches. They're happy to find in favor of Scientology if it's something that will. They don't want to set case precedent that would open the door to making a similar decision with respect to perhaps Christian churches. I'm just saying it's the only thing that even makes sense, because I don't get it.
Yeah, it's when it comes to the Supreme Court's treatment of religious organizations, generally speaking, they have a tendency to win because of I would say it's even more than just conservative Supreme Court justices and their projection of how the treatment would affect Christian churches too. I think that there's been a long history on the Supreme Court of having expansive protections for religious exercise, and it's really just in my personal opinion, it's just because it's coming from the First Amendment, and the First Amendment tends to be a pretty strong trump card. Now, this issue in front of the Supreme Court is really interesting because what the Supreme Court lately has been deciding on arbitration agreements is interpreting it as essentially as a general contract. So, in some respects, that means that they've found in favor of the person who was trying to enforce the arbitration agreement. But then in other cases, they've also found that, courts can't just come up with their own like tests to try to analyze these things to try to put like a thumb on the scale in favor of arbitration either. So it'll be really interesting if they actually do decide to take this up for oral argument and then have a back and forth about it, because this sort of connection between two things, which is arbitration agreements and the First Amendment, is very, very interesting and somewhat novel, I think, in my opinion. So I have a feeling that they I don't know. I'm not necessarily the best predictor about what the Supreme Court's going to do, but I have a feeling that they might actually take it up for oral argument. In which case, I definitely want to go through the audio of it and sort of pick through it on a live stream at some point. But I think, oh geez, hang on, sorry, I need to change this to subscribers only because we are getting bots again. Sorry about that. So, Aaron, are you there? You might be frozen, or am I frozen? I hope I'm not frozen. Let's see here. We might have a little bit of a technical. Yep. Okay. He disappeared for a second, so I think that he will be back in a minute.
He's frozen.
Yeah.
He's just staring straight.
All right. So we will, I'm sure he'll be back soon. Let me see if maybe I don't have a DM from him. All right. I'm sure he'll be back in a minute. Okay. Oh, yeah, you guys could hear Mr. Bites in the back. Yeah, he came in to confirm that it was in fact frozen on Aaron's end. So, all right. So we got rid of the bots, but unfortunately we also got rid of Aaron. I don't think he's a bot. So I think we should be okay. Here we go. Now you're back. It
I,
happens. We're live.
I don't know. I have super
Uh,
fast internet. I don't know why that happens.
It's okay. It happens. It happens every once in a while. It's just it's this is just what happens when we go live. It's the joys of live streaming, really. So, anyhow, let me get a couple chats here because there were some addressed to you. Kelly Marie is a member of Bike Club, so I unfortunately can't show it up on the screen because StreamYard is weird about showing member chats. But she said, "Hey, AA Ron, say hi to Goliath for all of us." Is Goliath your dog?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. And then Crystal, thanks so much for the super chat. Says, question, Aaron, how's your suppressive pup doing?
He's doing fantastic. So you might not be familiar with the story. Alita, do you know the story?
No, I don't.
So at the end of my episode of the show, I tell a really funny story about my neighbor who is a Scientologist, who my kids were very friendly with. And she loves my dog, and my dog had free access in and out of her house. And like we had a gate, our yards touched, and we had a gate. And if we were leaving the house, we would just let him into her yard and everything. Anyway, she said, let's discuss how to handle the disconnection from the children. But I don't want to disconnect from the dog. He would not understand. And I'm like, oh, my children, they totally get it. But the dog, that's where we draw the line.
Definitely. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's great. What kind of a dog do you have?
A lighthearted moment in an otherwise very sad show. But so he's doing great.
What kind of a dog is he?
He's a Labradoodle.
Oh, nice. Mine is a chocolate lab mix. So she's often on this chair right here, just snoozing. But I guess right now she's with Mr. Bites, just hanging out. So I'll either have her kind of off in the corner, or one of the cats will usually jump up on the desk at some point. So, but I guess for now they're leaving me alone a little bit. But that's really cute. So, oh no, you're back. Okay. I think you were frozen for a second again. Okay. Okay. Let's
just been
talk.
popping in and out a little bit.
Yeah. I think that might happen from time to time. It's something that, I mean, everyone that welcome to live streaming. We deal with this all the time, unfortunately. So he is frozen again. Okay. When we are back, I've got some more questions about Scientology. We'll take a minute. Okay. Good idea. Oh, and then he disappeared. He'll be back in a minute. Up. Jump up.
Girl.
That's a good girl. Now you're back. Now people can see you. So everybody, here's Indy. If you do not know Indy, now you know. That's a perfect time for her to decide to groom herself. Where are you going, Pop? Okay. Well, until he comes back, I can talk a little bit about the specific. Oh, here we are. All right. If you want, That's okay. That's okay. If you want, sometimes with unstable connections, it helps to turn off your video and just have audio on.
We'll keep trying. We'll keep trying.
Okay. Then that's fine then. Okay. So, that this issue about arbitrations is really interesting because one of the benefits of having a case go through arbitration is that you can choose the arbitrator, and that sometimes can be, at least on paper, beneficial because you can have someone who is well versed in that area of law. They're not even necessarily always retired judges, or lawyers. Sometimes they're just like subject matter experts in a particular industry. And that can be beneficial, but I can see how in a case like this, it has the capacity of just creating a massive conflict of interest where you have an arbitrator who is a member of the organization, that is an active member in good standing of the organization, deciding the fate of someone who has brought a particular claim from outside the organization. I can 100% see immediately how that's a massive, massive issue because, like let's say that you've got a judge that, it's a rather open shut case in favor of the person that's outside the organization. You can have the arbitrator kind of think to themselves like, well, I still want to remain in good standing in this organization. And if they have a reasonable suspicion or concern that maybe they have their own retaliation or their own reprisal or something along those lines just from making a particular decision, I could 100% see that being the case.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, it really can't be overstated. If any of the Scientologists who are acting as arbitrators were to find in favor of the person making the claim, they themselves would be subject to being expelled from Scientology, losing their friends and family. And it's just, it's very hard to wrap my mind around how any of the courts have reviewed this and said, we're not allowed to wade into that. So I just hope it goes differently. I mean, luckily, we're not talking about an arbitration in the criminal case. And luckily, there's a very low probability that the Supreme Court will overturn the appellate ruling that is currently in favor of the plaintiffs. But it's incredible. Let me ask you a question. In a normal arbitration, is someone allowed to have an attorney present usually if they choose to?
Yeah.
Not in a Scientology arbitration.
How so? That's so strange to me.
Truly. By the way, there's only been one arbitration in the history of Scientology. Let me make sure before I keep telling the story that my connection is okay.
Okay.
Let me know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we're good.
Am I good?
Yeah.
In history of Scientology, there's only been one arbitration, and it was only done a couple years ago.
Really?
Because the entire arbitration policy only came up about maybe 15, 20 years ago, just to stop all of the lawsuits that Scientology was experiencing. There is actually no Scientology policy about arbitration. I mean, and remember, I said everything in Scientology is written. Arbitration is just something the lawyers made up. There's no Scientology policy on how these things are to be conducted. And so a couple years ago, Luis and Rocio Garcia were suing to get some money back. And Scientology had to admit, they were suing in the courts. Scientology was trying to throw them into arbitration. And Scientology had to admit, oh yeah, we've never actually done one before. And the courts were like, okay, well, what policies do you have that describe how this should be done? And they just made something up, right? There's an internal justice procedure in Scientology called a committee of evidence. It's most closely related to like a court martial. Okay. A committee of evidence is considered a penalty. You don't just ask for one. Like, it's considered a penalty. And they said, oh, these policies about a committee of evidence, this is how we're going to do an arbitration. Oh, and by the way, this is scripture. You're not allowed to determine whether this is fair or unfair. You're not allowed to do that. And so for the first time ever, Scientology put on this little fake show that they called an arbitration. And Luis Garcia brought an attorney, and they said, no, he's not allowed here. This isn't a court of law. This is an internal religious arbitration. And Luis even requested that the arbitration be recorded. And they said, no, you can't record this. And so, I mean, it just seems so egregious. You can't even have an attorney present, just present. Like, they didn't even say he can be here, but he can't speak. They said he can't be here. He can't participate. So how does that have any resemblance whatsoever to something a court of law would call an arbitration? No recording of the procedure, no representation.
Yeah, that is all pretty wild. So let me pull back, I guess, before arbitrations happen. So let's say somebody does make a complaint within the organization. Is there, I mean, I would imagine there's a specific process that complaint takes to be heard or determined within the organization. Can you take me through those steps?
Absolutely. Because so if you write a report on another Scientologist, there's a variety of things that will be done. I guess you could say as a punishment, Scientology doesn't consider anything to be punishment per se. They don't consider that to be therapeutic. There are procedures in place to essentially fix the damage that you've caused. Oh, this is how the organization thinks about it. And this does get us into a subject that I haven't even tried to explain on my channel because it can get so convoluted. And it's called the Scientology ethics conditions. And I don't think we want to get into that whole subject here.
Sure.
But
we can keep it surface level. That's fine.
But L. Ron Hubbard basically says at any point in time, we are all in a particular operating condition. You're never just in no condition. You're in some condition. And part of the magic of Scientology is having the technology of how to be able to identify what condition it is that you are in, even in various aspects of your life, and applying the exact formula to move out of that condition and into the next higher condition. Okay. Now you have non-existence is like sort of condition, and I won't go on too long about this, but conditions of non-existence are assigned based on production, like a statistical graph. Like if you're a bricklayer, how many bricks did you lay? If it was crap, no bricks, that's non-existence. And there's conditions above. So non-existence and above is based on production. Below non-existence, you go, below non-existence, how could you be below not existing? Well, below non-existence is considered, you are not just being unproductive, you're being destructive. So getting in trouble in Scientology is the ethics officer will assign you a condition, one of the conditions that's below non-existence. And you have things like enemy, treason, doubt, liability, and confusion are the 5 conditions below non-existence.
Okay.
Every condition has what they call a formula. So just a series of steps, and you have to do these steps for the ethics officer to go, okay, good, you're out of treason, and now you're an enemy. And okay, so you have whatever it takes. Like that's the surface level description. The details that we won't get into is, okay, but what does it actually take to come out of that condition? What are the formula steps and how do you complete them? We won't get into that.
Okay.
So usually when someone gets into trouble, they're assigned a lower condition. And in a case like what we're talking about here with Danny, you'd have to get a SEC check, which is a security check, which is a form of Scientology auditing that is more akin to an interrogation and less akin to a counseling session. Like normal Scientology auditing is generally comparable to what most people would be familiar with in a counseling or a therapy session.
Okay.
In the sense that it's one-on-one talk therapy. Okay. Now a Scientologist would bristle at being described that way, but it's the best way to describe it.
Okay.
That's normal auditing. There's another kind of auditing that's just purely interrogation. It's about finding out what you did, getting information that you don't want to tell me. And then that is called sec checking. So Danny would have been assigned lower conditions and he would have received sec checking. And that has been verified by victim B, or victim B, Jane Doe 1, has verified that Danny was subjected to this, but so was she. And that's one of the kickers in Scientology. Is part of the Scientology philosophy is fundamentally, spiritually, you are at the cause of anything that ever happens to you, even if someone else is also the cause. This is one thing that's been a little missed in the reporting of this, is not just this, but other things like this when it comes to Scientology. It's not that Danny didn't get into trouble. It's that the victim gets into almost just as much trouble. And then, of course, you have the fact that no matter how much trouble Danny gets in internally, the one thing they'll never do is report it to the authorities. So you have that.
Right.
And I want to make sure I've answered you. So you're like, what is the process when someone submits a report? Yeah.
Right.
So no matter the severity of the report, the process really is the same. It's not like there's any extra big guns that they bring out if you're dealing with SA as opposed to if you're not dealing with SA. It's all the same. Because Scientology considers that the core fundamental spiritual reason that anyone does anything wrong is always the same, regardless of the severity, right? So, he would have done lower conditions, even if it took him months and months and months to finish the lower conditions, and he probably got dozens or hundreds of hours of sec checking. And one of the things that has become apparent in some of the affidavits that victim B and Jane Doe 1 filled out is at no point in any of this did Danny genuinely express remorse or regret for what happened. He continued to sort of act like, and it does seem like it was an act, kind of not really get it, sort of, what's the big deal kind of thing.
Okay.
And it's actually clear, and I think this is going to come back to haunt Scientology. It's actually clear that the people who were working with Danny on the church side of things, the Scientology side of things, it's clear that they actually did understand the magnitude of this. And they actually were trying to get Danny to snap out of it, wake up, stop acting like this is not a big deal. You've really messed up here. And you might go, that might sound like sort of a saving grace. Oh, they weren't just heartless. They really knew that Danny messed up here. I think the fact that they really did seem to believe the victim. I was reviewing a lot of what's been reported on this over the last couple of days. Even what victim B says makes it clear the people she was dealing with at the church did seem to, not Julian Schwartz. There's one person at the Scientology, Julian Schwartz, her ethics officer, who basically said, hey, we don't use that word here. And that's not what happened. He was trying to get her to sort of pump the brakes a little bit on what she was saying. But it does seem that the other people involved 100% believed her, even if they didn't want her to use that word. It seems like they more have an operating basis of, they seem to think that SA is you ambush someone with a knife in the park and, do it in the bushes. And if it's anything other than that, we don't use that word.
Right.
But they believe her.
Okay.
And that's going to come back and haunt them because they can't use the defense. Well, we didn't encourage her to involve the authorities because we didn't ascertain that this legitimately happened. It's very clear that they believed this happened. It's very clear that Danny was, in Scientology terms, in a lot of trouble. And it's very clear that they still essentially threatened the victims with consequences if they were to inform the authorities. And I just think, again, I know Scientology is not a defendant in this case. I just think that the Judge Almeida, is going to look at this, and it's just so bad for Danny and it's so bad for Scientology. And I would not be surprised, depending on how all this plays out, to see Scientology brought up on obstruction charges even after this case is over. I would not be surprised.
Okay.
It's so core to everything that's happened in this case. And one of the things that was revealed about a week or two ago is that the state itself is actually bringing evidence of not only of Scientology's harassment of these victims. That's actually being introduced as evidence, like after the fact, the after the fact harassment.
Right.
And so, and you might even wonder that seems less relevant to the case at hand than even the obstruction. And yet it seems like that evidence is going to be allowed to be introduced by the prosecution. So it's just going to be so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they would probably be able to, at least my thinking about it, I think that the argument that the state would probably use about the to bring in that kind of evidence about the retaliation aspect probably has something to do with the harm that they suffered after coming forward with their allegations, which is, you know, that would be relevant, right? Because it's like it's not just the harm of you know what it is that they allegedly went through, right? Of being a victim of SA, but also of being, you know, socially ostracized for making the complaint, being, you know, having all kinds of retaliatory tactics used, that kind of thing. So I can see the angle that the state would be able to sort of pull this evidence in, into the trial, but that would be very, very interesting. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that for an organization that seems to be pretty good at maintaining its own privacy between itself and the members, it seems like that would be very, very damaging to it. But very, very eye-opening as well. I mean, I know that there's a lot of interest, I think, among people who are not Scientologists and never have been, you know, just into the organization itself, because it's just it's different, right? It's kind of a religion, but it seems like it's kind of not at the same time, right? Because it's sort of a bit of a blend between like a normal secular organization and a religious one. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is this concept of fair game, because it seems like that's pretty central to the retaliation civil case. If I'm not mistaken, right? Can you explain to people like what is the concept of fair game in Scientology?
The concept of fair game is that if someone is labeled by Scientology as a suppressive person, that Scientologists are told they will receive no repercussions for anything they do to destroy that person, business-wise, professionally, personally, legally. And the L. Ron Hubbard policy on this said they may be sued, tricked, lied to, and generally destroyed. And if you can't find the actual crimes, then make them up. Oof. And it just, and then there was a later policy where Hubbard says, we are canceling the practice of labeling someone fair game. But all of the policies and procedures on how to deal with suppressive persons remain in effect. And all that meant at that time is they were literally just no longer going to publish papers that literally said, this person is fair game.
Okay.
But he said, but the practices will not change. And
yeah. Okay.
You know, Scientology, I mean, the evidence of it is right there for everyone to see. Like every single person who appeared on the Scientology Leah Remini and the Aftermath show had a website created about them by Scientology, interviewing their Scientologist friends and family members and coworkers about how such horrible people these people were.
Oh, wow.
Were and always have been. I mean, Aaron Smith-Levin.com is a hate website created by Scientology.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. Like, have you experienced this kind of thing as someone who has left Scientology and has become a very vocal critic of Scientology? What kinds of things have you encountered that you would be comfortable with talking about? Obviously.
Oh yeah. So there's the website, but then you also, by reviewing the content on the website, you realize, wait a second. You wouldn't even be able to make up this bullshit story if you weren't having me followed, you know, like I'll give you a perfect example. Me and Mike Rinder, we're friends, and before the TV show, he was working with me in my business, and then laterwards we were doing a real estate project together, and they were surveilling the property that we were doing. We were doing a house flip. They were surveilling the property and taking down the license plates of all the cars that would come and go from that property, and finding out who they were. Like, we hired some workers off of like Craigslist and stuff like that to do some menial stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a portion on the website where they publish the mug shots
Oh my God.
of the people we had hired. And it's like, I don't give a shit if a guy was in jail. If I want to hire someone to do some drywall work, I don't give a shit if the guy's been
Yeah. Right.
I didn't even, like, Mike and I don't even know who these people are, but Scientology does, because they're surveilling the house, they're running tags, they're doing background checks. And it's almost like Scientology thinks they're engaging in this psychological warfare. I look at the website and I think it's amazing. Like, I look at that website and I go, you guys just broadcast to the entire world what despicable, horrible, spiteful, disgusting people you are. And it's not like anyone believes, like, no one goes, I wonder what the Church of Scientology thinks about this guy.
Especially if they have a familiarity with these kinds of
Yeah.
tactics,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was actually thinking that could almost be beneficial to you if they're essentially kind of doing groundwork for you that can actually be a cost saver for you if you're hiring people, that they run background checks for you. That, that if you have an employee that doesn't show up on the website, they've probably got a pretty good background.
That's right. And it's funny, because I was doing a lot of this real estate stuff, it gave Scientology a pretext to call, like me and my friend, we did a whole bunch of house flips.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get a call, there was one particular time, from a few people who had purchased properties from me. And they said, hey, I just want to let you know, I got a phone call from someone claiming that they were looking to hire you, and they were checking references and how was my experience with you. Well, right away you go, well, that's bullshit. That's a private investigator, because nobody hires me. I'm not for hire. I don't do house flipping for other people. I
Mm-hmm.
do house flipping for myself. So
Right.
they were literally just calling anyone who had ever purchased a property that I had sold and canvassing to find someone who would talk shit about me. And they found one. And I don't
You can
know
always find one.
and I don't know what story they told that person. I'm willing to bet that person has no idea that everything they shared was with a Scientology private investigator. And they probably have no idea that their information is on that website. And I've even considered doing a video about it, because honestly, it kind of pisses me off that this person even said anything that they said. But I was like, but you see, that's an example of what they do. So
Yeah.
and this was years after I'd left Scientology.
Yeah.
And they go through they spend all this money, all this time and effort doing this stuff that has no real world effect. But they don't have anything better to spend their money on, really. So why not spend it on harassing critics? They really have nothing better to spend their money on. I mean, Scientology, I know it's kind of off the topic here, but Scientology is shrinking. The membership is shrinking. The only thing that's going up about Scientology is total assets, and reserves. But yeah, if they were expanding, and flourishing and prospering, they wouldn't have the time, care, or attention to spend to harassing former members, because who really cares? Honestly, who really cares?
That's fair.
If you're David Miscavige, who cares if some former Scientologist is talking smack about you? How does that affect your life? It doesn't.
Yeah. Every religion has the people that decide to turn away from that religion for one reason or another. And then oftentimes, every religion and every faith has its own critics too. So, it's Scientology would definitely not be unique in that regard, but it does seem to be somewhat unique in the methods that it chooses to employ in response to those critiques. Anyhow, well, I guess I think we've got one more super chat here. It says, Alyssa Ramirez, thanks so much for the super chat. Says, how would you pick a jury? Exclude other denominations? Which ones? I would try to have, so I would, if regardless of if I were the prosecution or the defense in this case, I would, well, I don't know, maybe the defense would want to have people, but on the prosecution side, I would definitely not want to have any Scientologists on the jury, because generally speaking, and the reason why I started off saying the defense too, generally speaking, you don't want to have anyone that is a subject matter expert in any of these areas that might be relevant, including Scientology, even if you think that they might be favorable to you. Because, and the reason for that is because the juror can then become potentially a sort of like leader back when they are doing deliberations, and they can bring in other information that they know from elsewhere that you have not put in front of that jury. And so it's more of an issue of like information control, not to say that you are trying to like manipulate the jury, but just that you're trying to make sure that the kind of information that is getting put in front of them is what is proper under the rules of evidence, and what is, proper for them to consider for that particular case. So regardless of whether someone is a former Scientologist like Aaron, or, a current Scientologist like Tom Cruise, I would not want to have them. I would not want to have them on the jury either way. So, other than that, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you so much with all the tech issues and all that stuff. Thanks so much for joining me for this. Do you have anything else that you would like to say before we head out?
Well, a couple things I think viewers would probably find interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe did you know there's only 30,000 or less Scientologists in the entire world? Did you know that?
Really? That's surprising.
So even here in Clearwater, where I live, Clearwater has a population of 120,000. There's maybe 3,000 Scientologists here in Clearwater.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is crazy. Remarkable how small Scientology is. I mean, even in Los Angeles, you'd be very hard pressed to come up with more than 7,000 Scientologists in all of LA.
Wow. Okay. LA is obviously a very big metropolitan area, so that's very surprising.
And it occurred to me to mention that because the chances of a Scientologist inadvertently getting a jury summons for this thing is close to zero.
Okay. That makes sense. Because then they probably I would imagine that there would be a chance that they would also know some of the parties that are involved. And so then there would definitely be potentially a conflict of interest too.
That's an excellent point, because Scientology is so small that almost everyone knows everyone. I mean, particularly by 1 degree of separation, every Scientologist is connected by 1 degree of separation. So like, if you are one of these people who get auditing at the Celebrity Center, you know almost everybody else who gets auditing at the Celebrity Center.
Okay.
And so that would be an immediate disqualification to be on the jury, to actually know the people involved. I mean, is that correct?
I'm sorry, one more time.
If a potential juror were to actually know any of the people involved in the case, I mean, that's an immediate disqualification, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, they would not be chosen for the jury, because there's more potential information that they would have on the individuals that would be improper for them to consider when they're making a decision. So that would be a bigger thing, rather than just basic bias of being a member of the organization.
And the last thing I wanted to say, even if I put myself back in the shoes of being a true believing Scientologist, if you did not have to call yourself a religion in order to get the kind of legal protection that Scientology seeks, Scientology would not give a damn about calling itself a religion or pretending to be religious or anything. Like, even as a true believing member, dedicated, working for them and everything, everyone knew it was a charade. The whole, oh God, we got a religion, church, oh God. Like, because Scientologists do look down on religion. Like, Scientologists do not consider Scientology to be a faith, even though they use the word religion. They do not consider it a faith, and they do look down on faith. They think that's just ridiculous. Like, Scientologists will never publicly admit it, but they really do look down on Christians or practicing Muslims or practicing Jews or whatever.
Okay.
Because it's like, oh, those poor people don't know the truth. They're so deluded, right?
I see. I
And
see.
it's funny, though, because in the eyes of the law, though, if you remove the requirement in order to call something a religion, if you remove the requirement to believe in a deity or a supreme being or a God, which it seems has been done, there is an argument to be made that Scientology fits the definition of religion, regardless of how you feel about its conduct and its destructive policies and bankrupting members and destroying families. And I just thought your viewers might find it interesting to hear that argument.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scientologists do genuinely believe in Scientology. And Scientology does genuinely believe that we are all immortal spiritual beings who cannot die. Like, it's not possible. You can't kill a thetan, a spiritual being. They don't believe in a heaven or a hell, but they believe we are all immortal spiritual beings who are natively godlike in our potential, and that only through Scientology auditing can you regain your native godlike spiritual powers. Like,
I see.
only Scientology auditing can free you from the endless cycle of birth and death and reincarnation and amnesia, not remembering your past lives. They do actually believe that.
Okay.
And if they weren't so goddamn horrible to people, they might actually be able to convince the world that they should be called a religion. The problem is all of this conversation is wrapped up in the tax exemption issue. Like, in the UK, Scientology isn't tax exempt because they have a public benefit test. You have to show that your existence is beneficial not only to your members, but to the public at large. And Scientology has never been able to pass that test.
Because all of their benefits are specifically for members and never for anyone outside the circle.
Yeah, Scientology doesn't give a shit about the homeless or the poor or anything. They hate those people.
Oh my.
And so
okay. Interesting.
That's why Scientology always sounds like a self-help thing, because it is. That's what it is. It's not religion in the way anybody would normally think about it. It's like, that's why Grant Cardone's always like, it's about yesterday and today and what can I do and making your business grow and feeding your family. And someone was interviewing, I was like, that sounded like self-help. That didn't sound like religion. But to a Scientologist, those are one and the same.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. I can understand that. Basically, what we would, I think, and now it's been a minute since I looked at the specific case law as to what qualifies as a religion. Because there's been some Supreme Court case law that sort of analyzed the issue. And it's, now I might embarrass myself now if I get this wrong, but it's something along the lines of, somebody having a bona fide belief in a particular religious custom, religious practices, or bona fide, engagement in certain religious practices. So, if you genuinely believe that something is true, that folks are immortal, and the only way to reach their higher religious selves is through a particular process, that does to me sound like a religious belief, even if it doesn't have the typical markings that we would see, that we would be most familiar with in a Judeo-Christian society, right? With like a, God at the center, or, these kinds of things. So, so that's very interesting. Thanks so much for pointing that out. I'm really glad that you did, because that helps me to definitely understand the beliefs within Scientology, aside from the actual policies and the behaviors and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So anyway, one more thing, Sandra Ramirez, thank you so much for gifting 10 Legalbytes memberships to people. That is very kind of you, very, very generous of you. And I know Lucky did at the top of the hour as well. So thank you so much as well. And any last word before we head out?
No, I think that's it. Just check out my Growing Up in Scientology channel if you guys are interested in that content. I keep it fun and pithy. And,
Yes, absolutely. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a great conversation. I would love to have you back to talk about this case or other cases. And yes, you guys, so he is Growing Up in Scientology is linked in the title as well as in the description below. So be sure to check out his channel. He's got so much great stuff talking about the Masterson cases, but also talking about the Grant Cardone case, and also just Scientology in general. So coming from the perspective of someone who has left the Church of Scientology, very, very fascinating stuff. I highly encourage you guys to go and check it out. Otherwise, and with that, I will see you guys in the next video.